is the character of this country. Decency, honor, respect, treating people with dignity, making sure that everyone has an even chance. And I'm going to make sure you get that. You haven't been getting it the last 4 years.
We haven't been getting decency or respect the last 4 years, the last 14 years, the last 40 years, perhaps even the last 400 years. Welcome, everybody, to Burn It Down with Kim Brown. Happy Friday to all who are watching. We appreciate if you are joining us from the Real News Network. And of course, for everyone who used to look who this kind of hard on Stir Crazy there. Nice to see y'all glowing faces again. Hey, listen, we have a wonderful show in store for you today. Now, it would not be Burn It Down with Kim Brown if we weren't about to thoroughly mock last night's presidential debate. The final of what should have been 3 debates turned out to be only 2 because Trump had the COVID and was trying to kill Joe Biden. But apparently Joe Biden got past it and was comfortable to share the stage with Donald coronavirus Trump. Howsomever, it was sort of like how I would describe like a battle of the terribles. I feel like Kristen Welker, the wonderful moderator, well, somewhat wonderful. She did all right. We give her about a C. But I feel like she would ask these very serious questions about important topics. You know, Mr. President, Vice President Biden, what do you think about the issue of Black Lives Matter or climate control or immigration? And then she goes, wrong answers only. And that's what came back because it was just a bunch of just shamblery. I don't even know if that's a word, but if it is, I just made it up. Trademark shamblery from both of their mouths. So we're going to discuss that. Also going to discuss the whole issue of voter suppression. If you think Russia, China, and Iran is meddling in elections, maybe you need to go talk to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Hell, even the damn Supreme Court, they just ruled that the state of Alabama could deny disabled people and people who are predisposed to perhaps catching COVID, deny them the ability to curbside vote. Mind you, you have been able to previously curbside vote in Alabama. So there is a lot of chicanery going around and we are so close to the election. So without further ado, hold on. Wait. Okay. Shout out to everyone that's in the chat and in the comments. Of course, we want to hear from you. I believe, are we on Periscope, Dwayne? Wonderful. Shout out to everyone that's on Twitter and Periscope watching us as well. Now it's time to introduce our fantastic panel. And I'm very excited because this is the first time that this group of guests has been on Burn It Down with Kim Brown. They are Stir Crazy alum. Let's put it that way. And I asked these group of people because they are funny. And I think we need to laugh at that shit show we saw last night. So y'all, welcome to the program, independent journalist Justine Barron, sociologist Taure Brown, and Real News visuals producer and researcher Andrew Corkery. Family, bienvenue, welcome, bienvenidos. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Yeah, great. Watching the dumpster fire, you know?
Did you watch it? Who watched the whole thing? Hands up if you did. Yeah, okay. All right. Yes, we all wasted the same amount of time together. But for the purpose of the conversation, and here's the thing, you know, no one is changing anybody's mind at this point. Really, this is about a mobilization effort right now. And that was kind of on display with Trump sort of going way left with all his, you know, Hunter Biden, you know, Joe Biden's brother, you know, getting money for Russia, Ukraine, which for all the fuck I know, could be a thing. But it just sounds like nonsense. And not to say it's not based in fact. I have no idea if it is or it isn't, because it's really not going to change my opinion about either one of them either way. But I wanted to start off with that first clip that we led with, because Joe Biden made this direct appeal about character more than once during last night's debate. And I thought that was strange. Taure, you know, Joe Biden seems to think that he's not quite as big as an asshole as Donald Trump, but I don't think he's correct about that.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the history of it and the ability for him to kind of harm and weaponize and just be an asshole throughout his kind of congressional career, I mean, it's hard to, you know, I mean, they fall under the same boat for me, just kind of whatever label you want to slap on it. Joe tries to make a moral position out of being the U.S. president. And being a U.S. president, no matter how much they try to pop themselves up on morals, I mean, you're ultimately part of the devil. You're working on behalf of the devil, and you're doing the devil's work. Well, I'll call the U.S. empire. But anyway, so yeah, Joe, the whole thing for me last night is just Joe's whole plan is to say that Trump doesn't have a plan without really talking about what his plan is. And that's really what stuck out to me from Jump Street with Joe.
And you know, I think that's a pretty valid point, Justine, because while properly lambasting Donald Trump for his failed response to the COVID, I'm not even aware of Joe Biden's plan beyond the mask mandate. Joe Biden is failing to really smack Trump on his weakest point, his handling of the pandemic, with a comprehensive and thorough plan. He's just like, yeah, no, I think everybody should wear masks. Just like,
yeah, he's like Mr. Reasonable, listen to the scientists, won't talk about pandemic payments, which is really the only way that this is going to work. And he just dances around it. People are poor. It's like, yeah, what do you got for that? I feel like with the whole character issue, to me, this is about, I was thinking about relationships. So if you're in a relationship with Donald Trump, you're just like it's like Julia Roberts and Sleeping with the Enemy. It's just this like really abusive guy who makes fun of you every day and probably beats you, and it's just horrible. And then with Joe Biden, it's more like somebody who you can never pin down, is cheating on you, lying to you, promising to do things for you and then not doing it. But when you call him out, he just kind of gaslights you. Like, I don't know if anyone saw it, but the second season of Dirty John. So I was just thinking about these two kinds of abusive relationships, and that's pretty much the choice we're getting. And maybe a certain percentage of the time we're safer with the guy who's not literally beating us every day, although some people he is. And then once you become, like with the second model of abusive relationship, once you become kind of useless to him or a problem for him, then you're just garbage and he throws you out on the street. So that's why I thought character was really not what we're discussing here. It's just like, what model of abuse do we want?
Pretty much. I mean, and it's so odd. Thank you for pointing out the abuse and making that analogy, because Andrew, I mean, let's be real here. Like, presidents on their face, and even when you examine their records, every single one of them that we've had, not necessarily people, gentlemen of upstanding moral fortitude. I mean, these are generally imperialist pieces of shit, yes?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, they exist within the framework of the American empire. So to a certain extent, you know, even if they are kind of espousing certain viewpoints that go against that, there are systematic apparatuses inside of that, you know, network of the American empire, the Pentagon, you know, the State Department, all the private and military industrial contractors, the lobbyists, all that. That kind of taints your view and your ability to work outside of that system. So until people kind of start systematically addressing some of those issues as it relates to our value set and what we value in our country, which clearly, more than anything from last night's debate, I took away that we value, you know, military and militaristic rhetoric, and then, you know, no one, including China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, whoever it is, if they're a threat or not, you know, it doesn't really matter, just so long as, you know, we can enforce our, you know, control mechanisms onto their countries. And, you know, we are just this benevolent actor that doesn't actually do anything nefarious and doesn't actually deserve to be called out for anything wrong. Which obviously, if you look at American history and the history of the FBI, the CIA, the military industrial complex, everything like that, you'll actually learn that, you know, America is not some just benevolent actor. You know, we have played a massive role in creating the crises that we're seeing today. They're impacting the politics of the moment that we're living in right now.
Is that something that actually we can take a moment and honestly burn down? I mean, forever, for life, for everybody. Like, the president of the United States is not a moral example of anything. They are not the moral authority on anything. They are not holier than thou on absolutely jack shit that has to do with getting into heaven or the better part of the afterlife or whatever you believe in. So let's put some flame to that, fire that one down, burn it with fire. Okay. I want us to move along because, like I said, we got some funny folks on here today. And one of the funniest parts of the debate, Dwayne, I don't even think I got to tell you what clip I want. When Donald Trump is making the case that he is the less racist person on the stage, I'm like, are you really the less racist person on the stage? Because that guy over there, he's pretty racist too. You two, sir, are racist, but he's pretty racist. I can't really decide. Dwayne, take us away.
I am the least racist person in this room. I am the least racist person. I can't even see the audience because it's so dark, but I don't care who's in the audience. I'm the least racist person in this room.
Now, I was not clear. I mean, was he implying it was so dark in the room because there were so many black people in the room, but it didn't matter if they were black because he don't see race. He can't even see it. Hold on. Dwayne, run Joe Biden's response back to us if you could.
Nobody has done more for the black community than Donald Trump. And if you look, with the exception of Abraham Lincoln, possible exception, but the exception of Abraham Lincoln, nobody has done what I've done.
Abraham Lincoln here is one of the most racist presidents we've had in modern history. He pours fuel on every single racist fire.
And as at that point of the debate, I said, let me listen a little closely here to Joe Biden. Sorry, I mean, sir, it is like, the Klansmen pointing at the president of the White Citizens Council, talking about that guy's racist. Your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's Bull Connor and George Wallace, going back and forth with each other to figure out who's the most racist, right? And it is just, part of you just has to laugh about it because, I mean, even the Abraham Lincoln was, a pronounced white supremacist. So, and I mean, you can look at the fourth debate with him and Stephen Douglas. It got great lines about how he feels about black people, and it showed through his politics. He wanted to send our ass back to Africa and said, thank you for your service. Get the fuck out now. Because y'all can't live in peace. That was Abraham Lincoln's politics. So, the idea, I mean, Trump, it's like, how many black people can you harm as a capitalist, as a real estate person that probably helped push out, hundreds, if not thousands of black people out of New York and probably all over the globe where he has real estate. On the other hand, you have Joe Biden, who's wielded state violence and all the mechanisms of the U.S. empire to again, harm black folks here and all over the globe. So it's just almost a laughable thing. But I think the thing for me that's most shameful is the black folks that want to go back and forth with this who's the least or most racist president we ever had. The fact that Jamel from ESPN, or formerly from ESPN, had to get dunked on by the white dude, Steve Van Gundy, or Stan Van Gundy, I'm sorry. Like, for him to dunk on you saying, and like, yo, look, it doesn't really matter. All of them are pretty much fucked up and terrible people and have hard black folks and haven't done enough. It just shows that, like, the terrible state that black politics are at this moment.
Let me find that tweet, actually, because I saw that tweet and I was like, let me give Stan Van Gundy a closer listen. Because, Jamel Hill, respect to her as a sports writer, but she talks that bougie black nonsense that I really don't like. Why I'm looking for this Justine Barron. I mean, just knowing what you know about both of those men, who is the less racist? How do we? Okay, so I do look at racism kind of like on a scale, like on a continuum. I definitely think there's level 10 racism and level 1 racism. And I think some of the shit that Trump has done, the Muslim ban, taking out the ad in New York, calling for the death penalty for the exonerated five, formerly the Central Park Five. What else has Donald Trump allegedly used the N-word gratuitously? I wish someone would drop the tapes. People have been lying about or been fibbing to us about trying to drop these tapes for like 4 years now. And then there's Joe Biden. Joe Biden, I like Obama because he's clean and he's articulate. And then Joe Biden, we need to lock people up for stems and seeds for minimum 10 years. Like, how do you see the continuum of racism and where Trump and Biden sort of fall along that scale?
Okay, I'm more of a 3D kind of person, with my scales, but I'll work with your system. So I think Trump is always like a 10, just always, even when he says things like what he just said, that's a 10. I think Biden isn't really a person. He's more like an avatar. And so he kind of glides between 5 to 10, but he is a 10 like very often, and a lot more than, like, he says racist things during this campaign. How many, like 12? I didn't count, but there were so many moments. It's just, you're not Black if you don't vote for me. And then 2 weeks after that, there was another one. And whenever I would share something along the lines of, hey, this is racist, I would get so many mentions. You don't really think he's a racist. And because I don't think he's exactly a person, more just like an avatar of whatever we need liberalism to be at that moment, I can't place him solidly because he negotiates between those. I would never put him in the lower half of that scale, though, because the best he can ever do is be like a patronizing liberal, like charity worker, is the best he can pull off in terms of race consciousness. I mean, he never rises to the level of suggesting that a person of color is his equal. But yeah, so Trump that's the problem that liberals don't understand about Trump's appeal. And I talk to people who vote for Trump, even people of color who vote for Trump, and they regard him as a person and they regard Joe Biden as an avatar. Yes, and it's like, well, what do you mean? Because Trump is that guy, that asshole. And we know that asshole. And Biden is something different very often, hard to judge where he's going to fall on certain things. We'll speak about no fracking and then pro-fracking. And so that is one of the problems, for him. But, anyway, so I mean, in that, he probably was like a 7, but he's often a 10. But I'm just working with your system.
I'm a little curious. When you point out, I'm assuming on social media, Joe Biden's racist rhetoric, coded, dog whistled, whatever, and people respond to you and say, you don't really think he's racist. Who are these people, if you don't mind sharing with us?
Like white liberal media types just trying to accuse me of doing something terrible by pointing out racism. So that's who they are, almost always. Or just, white folks, yeah.
Andrew, your thoughts here about who's competing for the most racist of the presidential candidates from the two major parties. I mean, a case can be made for the both of them being the top racist, the grand wizard, so to speak. Andrew, am I frozen? Or is Andrew frozen?
Oh, sorry.
We can hear him.
Okay. To get to your point, I mean, I think that, the main problem is that Biden has no real guiding moral or policy ethos a lot of times. So he just kind of goes with the wind of whatever the political moment is. So that kind of just leaves him really open to attacks on policies that at the time he thought were good. But in reality, people in the Black community and other people as well were saying at that time that, this is probably not a good idea to imprison, large populations of minority communities, just being totally immoral just on its face. It also creates a lot of other inherent problems for society that are going to take, decades to reconstruct and understand. So I think that that's really his problem. He doesn't actually engage with Black voters in a way that's genuine, and he kind of looks to them as a voting constituency that he thinks he can win just by default of the fact that Trump is like the most abhorrent, racist president or racist individual we've had trying to go for the White House since probably Richard Nixon. But I mean, all American presidents have been like this to a certain extent. I mean, especially, white American presidents. And, even with Barack Obama, the Black community has a lot of problems with him. And how he didn't actually do a lot of the things that he needed to do in order to advance the causes of the Black community that are worth addressing as well. And Biden is part and parcel of that legacy. So he wants to bump that white, moderates, liberals, identify with, as well as elements of Black America. But he doesn't want to take the fall.
Sports personality, former of ESPN, as Tori mentioned, she tweeted, Lyndon B. Johnson would like a word about the president who did the most for Black people. And to that, Stan Van Gundy, new coach of the New Orleans Pelicans. Tori, do I have that right?
That is right. Oh, sorry.
All right. So Stan Van Gundy quote tweeted Jamel and said, looking at our history of oppression of Black people from slavery to Jim Crow and lynchings to mass incarceration and police killings, the question of which president has done the most for Black people seems irrelevant. No one, president or otherwise, has done enough. Boom, boom, boom. Just smack Jamel around the timeline a little bit. So just wanted to give y'all some context about that. Dwayne, let's hear from SOT 5, shall we? Since we're on the topic of the drug war and the crime bill, let's hear what Joe Biden and Donald Trump had to say about both. Okay, we got to go somewhere else. No worries. There's plenty of places to go. Let's go. Okay, let's go, shall we? I guess do you have SOT 4? Let's go there. Shall we go there? Okay.
The fact of the matter is, there is institutional racism in America. We have to provide for economic opportunity, better education, better health care, better access to schooling, better access to opportunity to borrow money to start businesses. It's about accumulating the ability to have wealth as well as it is to be free from violence.
He's been in government 47 years. He never did a thing except in 1994 when he did such harm to the Black community. And they were called, and he called them, super predators. And he said that. He said it, super predators. And they have never lived that down. 1994, your crime bill, the super predators, what I've done. Criminal justice reform, prison reform, opportunity zones, one of the most successful programs. People don't talk about it. Tremendous investment is being made.
You know, Tori, if you are a relatively disengaged, let's say white voter or non-Black voter, right? And you don't know whether or not these policies that Trump is just rattling off actually made any impact on improving the life conditions or the employment opportunities or educational opportunities or income opportunities for Black people. You know, Trump might be rattling off what kind of sounds like a semi-impressive list of policy gains to benefit Black folks, but survey says not quite.
Yeah, I mean, for most Black folks, if you're around a lot of other Black folks, you hear more often than not the awful and terrible thing Trump does, right? Because your grandma, your auntie, she's on Facebook, and she's saying, oh, did you see Trump call such and such this and this yesterday? So, for the most part, people on the street aren't moved by Trump saying, I did criminal justice reform, or I did, this X, Y, Z, right? But they're also not swayed by Joe Biden, who's basically his only excuse is that, oh, well, the Republicans were the reason why I couldn't get anything done as far as making something substantial for Black folks. I think, we're living in a time now where a lot of people are questioning, like, okay, what is voting Democrat got us for all this time? And, we're tired of hearing about the big bad boogeyman that's going to come and crash the world every year. I'm old enough to remember all these conversations about George Bush and how the world was over and he's going to go to prison and all these things after he gets out of office. And none of that materialized, right? Now that these same kind of folks are, in hugs and pictures with George Bush and all these things. So the idea that Trump is going to sway a massive amount of Black folks, no. What's the question is Joe Biden going to do enough, or are they going to hate Trump enough to feel like they just need to go and vote, or they're just not going to vote? And that's what it's going to boil down to.
I want us to have a chance to holler at some of these comments in the comments. I'm so happy people found us. This is beautiful. Red Sea Socialist says Biden is more racist. Noted. Red Sea Socialist also says Biden has affected more Black people than any other president alive today. I definitely think that there's a case can absolutely be made for that, just for the simple fact that, number one, I mean, the 94 crime bill is, for all intents and purposes, really still on the books. And it's sort of only been able to be eroded piecemeal, and it's taken a long time, and it's still not completely gone away. And there's a lot of holdover policies stemming from the 94 crime bill and the general war on drugs. I mean, Justine, like, for example, I remember seeing you tweet about this maybe a little while ago about the state of Maryland. Let me make sure I get this correct. So in the state of Maryland now, the smell of marijuana is no longer probable cause, for the simple fact that, officers aren't trained drug dogs. You know what I'm saying? Like, how are you just going to rely on the word of somebody saying that they smell marijuana when more often than not, it was just used as a pretext to affect a search of either a vehicle or of a person. But it was inherently racist policies that was allowed to germinate, so to speak, because of bills and laws passed, such as the 94 crime bill.
Yeah, that's true. There's a loophole still with cars at play, that they could still kind of claim it's a ridiculous loophole to do with contraband, that if they smell it, they could still claim. But I think that's going to happen soon, that they'll get rid of all of the probable cause around smelling marijuana, which is good because cops say they smell marijuana and then they never find it, which I feel like they should never be allowed to say they smell it again, because obviously their nose doesn't work, or more likely they lie. I think the crime bill is, Biden winning the primary was heartbreaking in large part because of the crime bill. I mean, you cannot underestimate how terrible it's been. If you just look at incarceration rates since then, it just skyrocketed after that and has barely dropped. So that's why he doesn't really have a response. And I think that Trump's political strategy to go after Black voters is really interesting and surprising, and I think in some ways kind of successful. Not that I think he'll engage that many Black voters, but as Tori said, there'll be a lot, maybe more non-voters than there would have been by keep hitting that point. Those are moments where Trump is a smart politician and we shouldn't keep calling him stupid. The crime bill is terrible. It's been it's been genocidal in a way. Not in a way. It's just been one of these genocidal acts on people of color in this country. Separating family. If you look at the UN definition of genocide, and not to mention the large number of young children that have been incarcerated since that bill was passed. Real bad, has made my vote this year kind of hard,
Absolutely.
I think too, Kim, if I could just jump in real quick, I think the crime bill is part and parcel of why Trump is able to kind of muddy the waters on this whole race issue, even still with the fact that he literally is the most overtly racist president I think we've ever had. I mean, it's because of the systemic damage and destruction of that policy that Biden, up until recently, has refused to even admit was a problem on his record. So, I mean, had Biden come out earlier and really owned it and said that, this was a problem earlier on, Trump would, politically speaking, not be able to use it quite as much.
Yeah, I just want to jump in for just a second for one thing, because a narrative that's popping up a lot is that, and Biden has done it too, it says, well, Black politicians or Black people wanted this bill, and that, it wasn't, I just gave Black people what they wanted. I wanted to get rid of the crime at the time. And what people are doing is, some people are running around and saying, well, yes, it was needed. This, it was terrible. Even though we know, again, crime in the 80s and 90s was bad. The crack era was bad, right? There were murders, high murder rates, all those kind of things associated with it. But those folks didn't necessarily want millions of Black people to be shoved into the prison system. They wanted jobs. They wanted to get people treatment. They wanted a whole bunch of other things at the time. And there was several people, several organizations, all kinds of people who resisted on the streets, right? But there were a set of politicians, Black politicians, specifically in like cities. You can read the book by Locking Up Our Own by James Foreman Jr., who did kind of engage in these policies that were building this kind of mass incarceration. And Joe Biden was making sure that they were going to get the federal money for that. And what that really speaks to is the class differences among Black folks that we need to pay attention to. The bougie Negroes will sell us out and they'll lock our ass up and then act like they weren't a part of it or that it was necessary. So I really wanted to touch on that point as far as the class differences among Black folks.
Well, since both presidents have made it clear, both presidents, Vice President Biden and Donald Trump, through their words and deeds over the years have made it perfectly clear that they stand in opposition to Black people being free, Black people having equal rights. They are both racist. Wonderful. Check and mate. So in addition to Biden and Trump both being against Black people, they are both against the earth. And they could give a shit whether or not the earth survives or don't survive. They figure, fuck it, we're going to be out of here in less than 10 years anyways. So let's go to the portion of the debate where fracking keeps getting brought up. And justifiably so, because again, wrong answers only should have been Kristen Welker's disclaimer for every question she threw out there. Dwayne, let's check it out.
How would you both combat climate change and support job growth at the same time, starting with you, President Trump?
We have so many different programs. I do love the environment, but what I want is the cleanest, crystal clear water, the cleanest air. We have the best carbon emission numbers that we've had in 35 years. Under this administration, we are working so well with industry, but here's what we can't do. Look at China, how filthy it is. Look at Russia. Look at India. It's filthy. The air is filthy. The Paris Accord, I took us out because we were going to have to spend trillions of dollars and we were treated very unfairly.
Climate change, climate warming, global warming is an existential threat to humanity. We have a moral obligation to deal with it. Our health and our jobs are at stake. That's what's happening. And what right now, by the way, Wall Street firms indicated that my plan will in fact create 18.6 million jobs, 7 million more than his. This is from Wall Street. And I'll create $1 trillion more in economic growth than his proposal does. Not on climate, just on the economy.
What about fracking?
All right, let me allow Vice President Biden to respond.
I never said I oppose fracking.
You said it on tape.
I did. Show the tape. Put it on your website.
I'll put it on.
Put it on the website. The fact of the matter is he's flat lying.
Would you rule out banning fracking?
I do rule out banning fracking.
I think he's lying, right? Didn't he say it?
Regardless, that debate was a race to the bottom right there. That was a race to climate catastrophe.
Yeah.
And I wasn't clear when Joe Biden talked about his plan. My plan will add 18.6 million jobs and $1 trillion to the economy. Is he talking about expanding fracking? Because I was not clear as to where those jobs or that industry or whatever he was referencing was going to come from. Andrew Corkery, the Obama administration sort of branded itself as this green friendly, huggy the earth. Okay, yeah, we're going to get the EPA in shape. We're going to implement these clean water rules, which they did. They did do some things that, of course, Trump immediately rolled back upon entering the White House. But this issue of fracking, Obama, the administration, gave the United States fracking en masse as an industry. And they can absolutely own that and take responsibility for that. And Trump supports it. Biden doubling down on it. The rest of us are screaming at the television, pulling our hair like, you assholes. Do y'all not understand how damaging fracking is to air, water, earth, all the things that are important and all the things that matter in preserving a safe environment?
Yeah, the lack of a debate on the severe consequences of fracking and in that framing is, in addition to the lack of a debate really between the two of them on foreign policy, or to a certain extent, lack of a debate on healthcare and, the fact that neither of them is proposing a public option. Biden's proposing a public option, but he's not actually for, Medicare for all. All of those issues, particularly the climate, are part and parcel of why, we see that Joe Biden is going for these middle of the road, never Trumper Republicans. And in order to get those people on board, he has to sacrifice the earth, is basically what's happening. He has to say that, we can't have a Green New Deal. We can't look at this not just from an economic lens. We just have to only look at it through that lens. We can't look at it as, dealing with the climate without thinking about the economy, which we do. We have to think about both things. But the problem is like when he's addressing that whole issue about how, my plan creates more jobs and whatever, like he's literally dodging the whole issue. He's talking about the economy instead of talking about the existential threat from the climate that has been exacerbated and put into full throttle by the Trump administration and the ravaging of any sort of like, EPA that's looking to look out for, the people of this country. So I think that the reason why Joe Biden can't say that, he's against fracking is because he's going to double down on these right-wing, Republicans, these Reagan-era Republicans and these, Clinton neoliberals and whatever. And he's doubling down on that whole base. And that base does not give a shit about the Green New Deal or anything that's going to substantially fix the, environmental catastrophe that we're currently living under.
And you know what? That's something that I've always found very sort of confounding about conservatives, right? Because these people sort of pride themselves on being big outdoorsmen, let's say outdoorsmen there, hunters, and they like to fish, and, they got the boat, we're going to go to the lake, we're going to catch us some bass, and et cetera. And it's what you going to say, Tori?
Don't disrespect the bass fishing. Now, I'm country. I love the bass fish myself. Chill out.
But hey, you don't want to pull out the three-eyed fish from The Simpsons out the lake, right? Like the environment sort of has to be pretty healthy in order for these outdoor sports to be truly enjoyed. But yet conservatives don't seem to back policies that will keep the water and air clean. And it's so hooked up that Trump is going to stand there and beat his chest about he wants the cleanest air and the cleanest water. Okay, well, go stand down there in South Baltimore and Pigtown underneath that trash incinerator and tell me about how clean the air is. Or for the people who live in East Los Angeles, where there's an oil refinery, next to an elementary school, or the people of Flint, Michigan, who have not been able to drink water out of the tap for over 2,000 days. I mean, there are no friends to the environment here, Tori. And I feel like the candidate's age is really playing a part in this because they're old and they don't give a fuck. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've said for a long time that, once Biden became the candidate, this is an election between two Republicans fighting over respectability politics for the most part. And that's like Andrew said, they agree on all the kind of things. And they definitely agree on that capitalism and that profit takes prime priority over the environment, humanity, our lives, everything else. So it's just the problem with Joe Biden is that he's in a party that is in transition, it looks like. And so you have people like AOC, other folks like that, who at least agree that, climate change is an existential threat to our society, to our lives. And they are saying like, no fracking, all these kind of things. And then you have Joe Biden representing this kind of old guard who has to, secure this kind of left vote. And he's trying to secure these kind of folks that are to his left just by saying, well, I'm not Trump. And then like Andrew talked about, he's really trying to appease this so-called white moderate he thinks that are going to swing towards him or whatever the case may be. And if he had a real plan, right, if he really was about, some kind of politics that had humanity involved, which he probably wouldn't be running for president of the U.S. empire. But nonetheless, let's pretend it's real. and think that if he had a plan, he would say, you know what? Well, I'm going to ban fracking, and I'm going to make sure that we subsidize all the workers that are going to lose their jobs. I'm not going to give $300 or $200 million to the police. I'm going to give that money to those workers until we can build new industries that can employ them at the time being. Right. But nobody wants to do that because that's considered socialist or communist. And that's the reason why those conservative folks don't care about saving the environment. Their only concern is they want clean water if they can afford it. As long as they can afford it and they have access to clean water, then they don't give a fuck about anybody else. So, and if you can't afford it, then it's a problem of your own individual. That's us as Americans, or no, I ain't American, but whatever y'all are, right, are socialized to believe in individualism. So their idea of if I don't have access to the great outdoors, if I can't catch the nice bass in the fresh lake, well, that's because I didn't work hard enough to have access to those kind of things.
Also, too, I think that language you're talking about, Taure, is really part of what Biden was talking about before with the coronavirus recovery. He was saying that, we have to protect businesses, right? Like we have to protect companies. We have to give them money. Nothing about the workers, nothing about the people who put their lives on the line every single day without appropriate PPE. It's all about this liability issue of companies not having, not being sued for sending their workers back to work before they have the appropriate measures, taking place, like in regards to the plexiglass and just like other different things too, that directly benefit everyone in this coronavirus pandemic. But it's really just so sad to see him really pander to this Wall Street group. And then at another point during this climate debate, he's saying that the Wall Street firms say that his plan is going to create more jobs. It's like, it's totally devoid of like anything critical of Wall Street that, people on the left have been talking about since really the rise of the Occupy movement in 2011. He just, kind of spits in the eye of like every single like left-wing Democrat constantly, because he just feels like we have no other choice but him. So he feels like he has to bring the right-wing people in so that he can solidify his majority. But at the same time, he's not going to actually give us anything unless we get a massive, movement together to kind of address some of these issues and make sure that, he's not really going to do anything unless these issues are addressed.
Justine, your thoughts, my dear.
Yeah, I pulled up these stats because Andrew was talking about how Biden is willing to sacrifice the environment, but I also think he's willing to sacrifice votes. In Pennsylvania, 74%, the whole state, important state, prefer strong regulations on fracking, and 60% would like to phase out fracking. So what are you doing? And it's the same with healthcare. It's like, this isn't about votes, is it? And I think Biden is very old, and I think he has sort of, in a way, like Bernie Sanders. Bernie has always been that guy who's always wanted free healthcare, always wanted to take on the duopoly. Biden has always just really liked Republicans. He loves them. He gives speeches for them. He talks about working with them. He puts them in his future cabinet. He put them in his convention. And I think that some of what we're seeing, and people don't really want to acknowledge, is that Biden is living his fantasy of being the coolest Democrat that the Republicans like. And I think he's just probably always felt that way. And then it goes way back where you can always see him talking about how Republicans like him and he has lots of friends that are Republicans. And obviously we have that problem with some of the other Democratic leadership. So that's why I think his presidency is going to be also a nightmare.
Guys, something that also needs to get burned down is the Democrats need to understand that at this point, we have seen the Republicans go so hard, not give no shits about, protocol or orderly or anything like that. I'm thinking of the Merrick Garland Supreme Court nomination specifically, right, where they went out of their way to deny Barack Obama the opportunity to appoint a third justice to the Supreme Court. And Republican voters don't give a fuck if their party works with the Democrats. Yet Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein in recent days have been cheerleading for the Republicans. Dianne Feinstein at the Senate Judiciary Committee for the hearing for Amy Coney Barrett, praising, of all people, Lindsey Graham. Bitch, are you crazy? Nancy Pelosi on a CNN interview recently talking about we need the Republican Party to get healthy because our democracy functions better when the Republicans are sane. No, fully disagree. And they need to understand that people on the left, we don't care if y'all work with the Republicans. They're batshit crazy. Y'all don't have to work with them. We would like to be on the side of progress, evolution. Like we would like our descendants to still be here in 100 years and be able to drink the water and breathe the air. Republicans, I don't know what the hell they want, but that's something that bothers me in general about the state of politics. It's like the Democrats are waiting for the Republicans to come back around and be reasonable again. And that horse left the barn long ago, and it's not coming back.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they all came up they came up and they got powerful under Clinton. And they all probably made a lot of money under that era. And they just kind of grew in their power and their influence. And it's kind of like my dad thinking that everyone has a 401k. It's just not caught up with the times. You know what I mean? They're just stuck there. And it was a good time for them and they think they could go back. And they got Obama trying to get on board with that. And they just are not paying attention at all to reality. And they don't care at all. They're very rich. By being in office, what should be like a living wage, they've become gigantically rich.
Yeah.
Who's trying to hop in, Andrew or Tori?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, and that's part of the problem with the Democratic Party that people on the left need to address is that they live in this fantasy world that the neoliberal order is still possible given the current the current environmental conditions, whether it be politically or in terms of the actual nature around us. They believe that expanding growth in a system with a finite amount of resources, that whole neoliberal doctrine, they still think that that's plausible and that can go ahead. And what is going to happen is if Biden actually pulls this off and wins the election, you're going to see that he's going to keep going down this neoliberal road, which is not going to solve the critical issues that the American people are facing, which is then going to lead to other people taking, a more populist message similar to Trump. And in another couple of years, there'll be another candidate that talks about these same issues because they've seen that Trump is able to play on this. It works. It divides the country. If you can do it in the correct way, you can get elected and you can take power. So if the neoliberals fail to deal with the structural issues at play, climate change, healthcare, foreign policy catastrophes, all sorts of issues, if they fail to deal with those without taking their neoliberal goggles and blinders off, we're going to be at the same juncture in another 4 to 10 years again, when another person like Trump comes about speaking this populist language and people are disaffected and distraught with the political system, and they're willing to give this person a chance. And that's only going to further fuel the inaction that we're currently seeing right now.
Tori, did you want to get in here on that?
Yeah. I mean, I think we just need to put it in a larger context. I'll just say that the U.S. empire is in decline. The U.S. can no longer control the world as it did economically. It is shifting towards China, towards Russia, towards North Korea, and they're working with other countries in Africa and South America, and they're forming relationships, and they're giving loans out that aren't like the loans that came out of the IMF and the World Bank, which caused, just devastation across the global South, right? So the U.S. is in decline, and what that means is that the ruling class of the United States empire is also at war with itself. It can't figure out how to solve its own problems. And I think this last era, this neoliberal era, that came in the late 70s and went out to the 90s and even now to this current era, they were the last ones to get fat off the hog of U.S. hegemony. And now they don't know what to do. And they're all scrambling, and you can just see it. And what's happening, what's that's causing is causing the crisis of legitimacy. People no longer really are starting to believe in the power of elections or so-called U.S. democracy. And people are asking fundamental questions about it, which is a very dangerous thing. So it's a great opportunity for people on the left to kind of snatch power and think about how we can reorganize our society and move towards a more progressive front. But it's also a dangerous time, like Andrew was kind of hinting at, that because the grabs of power are up are up and you have an empire in decline, you can get somebody. What happens when you get somebody who has Trump's politics, but is a little bit more articulate, a little bit better with PR, right? Who can appeal to even a broader base, but still use the same kind of rhetoric and politics, right? People often think that this neoliberalism and fascism, or what they consider to be fascism that Trump represents, are at odds with each other, when actually they're co-conspirators. And it's just reflective of what's going on with the U.S. ruling class, and that the empire is falling. The question is, who's going to be there? Who's going to be there when it crumbles, and what are we going to build up in its place?
And that's the problem with neoliberals, is they see Donald Trump as an aberration, right? They don't see him as connected to a larger historical history that has fundamentally supported the ideology and the policies and the rhetoric that he has espoused ever since he walked down that escalator, right? And so if you don't see that and you just see him as some aberration, you will work with anyone, including moderate Republicans, Lincoln Project, whoever, to make sure that he is gone and that you can continue on your neoliberal path as you were. The problem is that's not true. That's just inaccurate. He is literally the distillation of every single century of American racism that has existed. And so to have your historical analysis devoid of that is really problematic. And I just want to say one thing about the foreign policy framing as well that kind of gets to what Taure was talking about. This idea that our empire is in decline is something that the media and the political class of this country cannot psychologically understand or fathom. So that manifested itself in the way that the questions were framed last night, in that the only foreign policy issues that were actually discussed were in relation to election meddling against our country, a domestic issue that the neoliberals and, the Russiagate people like Rachel Maddow and all these other people, Lawrence O'Donnell, they continually perpetuated during the Mueller investigation and was proved totally false. But the problem is they can't escape that worldview. And so the framing and the questions and the ideology is fundamentally around, what are you going to do to make China pay? What are you going to do to make Russia pay? What are we going to do to make North Korea pay? Absolving America from any sort of, malfeasance or issues in its own foreign policy, and having a debate where you don't even talk about the actual issues in foreign policy. I could go down just a short list. I mean, there's this issue in Armenia and all that. So it's just Armenia and Russia, and we have a new nuclear treaty with Russia, the Iran nuclear deal, North Korea as a policy issue in terms of the militarism that the U.S. is espousing. All of that stuff could have been on the table, and including a lot more, but it wasn't discussed because we can't ideologically see that the problem is that our empire is in decline.
Real quick, guys, I didn't realize it was 5 minutes to the hour. We have spent almost a whole hour righteously bashing these two schmucks. But thank you, Andrew, for transitioning us to the second thing I kind of want to talk about. We're just going to have to talk about it pretty quickly, is the fact that there's a lovely piece of propaganda circulating the news cycle this week about election interference from Iran and Russia. Who else is trying to fuck with the election? China's trying to fuck with the election. And first of all, it makes no mention about how many elections the United States has interfered in. That's one separate point that perhaps we'll get into on another day. But when it comes to the issue of affecting our democracy and whether or not our elections are successful, safe and free, a lot of the election suppression begins at home. And as we look across the country where lots of states are now already engaged in early voting, we are seeing long lines, people sometimes waiting as short time as 10 minutes, depending on where you are, to perhaps several hours standing in line waiting to vote. And the Republicans have been really the ones behind this, driving different, the variety of the racisms, it is just vintage. So Dwayne, I want us to go to that clip. So in Texas, right? So we know Texas, big state, always gone red, but Texas has some purpling ability with the emergence of, more liberal places like Austin and the Dallas suburbs and Houston, et cetera. So what Texas, the state of Texas, was allowing curbside voting in Harris County, which is one of the largest counties. Whoa, but the Texas GOP says, no, that makes it way too easy for people to vote. And let's take it from there, Dwayne.
The Texas Republican Party is challenging the drive-through voting locations in Harris County. They claim voters who use the drive-through option but do not have disabilities are voting illegally. So what does the Harris County clerk have to say about this? He talks to our Matt Doherty.
On the first day of early voting, some people are casting ballots differently for the first time. They don't even have to get out of their cars.
Drive-through voting is for everyone, and those are unique centers. We're doing this for the first time in Texas, but it's totally different from curbside voting, and voters love it.
It sounds like a good idea. The less exposure to others, the better these days, and there's no standing for hours in the heat. But not everyone is happy about it, and some even say it's against the law. A lawsuit filed by the Texas Republican Party on Monday accuses Harris County Clerk Chris Hollins of allowing illegal voting. A statement from the GOP reads, quote, Chris Hollins is telling all Harris County residents that they are eligible for curbside voting when he knows that is not the case. Any voter that does not qualify to vote curbside under narrow statutory language would be voting illegally if allowed to vote drive-through. Curbside voting is permitted under the Elections Code for those who are sick or disabled. Hollins says drive-through voting is different than curbside voting. He says it's open to everyone. We asked the county clerk what's going to happen next.
We're going to continue operating those, continue offering this convenient and safe route for Harris County voters to have access to the franchise.
Matt Doherty, KHU 11 News.
Okay, so a quick update about that. That lawsuit was dismissed. So Texans and voters in Harris County will still be able to vote curbside, but again, not because the GOP didn't give it the good college try. And that's one example, right, of how the vote is being stymied. But also there was a big decision in Florida 2 years ago. Florida voters approved, I think it was called, I can't remember what it was called. I think it was Section 4. My apologies for blanking on that. But basically allowing formerly incarcerated felons the right to vote, restoring their voting rights. And Governor Ron DeSantis challenged that in court and went as far as to make an executive order saying that if these formerly incarcerated people had outstanding fines or restitution or anything of the sort, that would deny them their ability to vote. And I want to pick it up from there, from a really pretty good story out of Orlando. And kudos to this particular news station for the kind of language that they use to describe the population that they're talking about. Dwayne, let's take a look at that.
We're going to celebrate. We're going to show people that voting is something that we should want to do.
Desmond Meade is all ready for Saturday here at the Amway Center.
They're ready to have their voices heard.
He told me it's a big deal for the hundreds of returning citizens who are in fact marching to the Amway to early vote.
So many of these individuals will be voting for the first time. I myself is going to be voting in the very first presidential election ever.
This comes after Meade, who runs the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, or the FRRC, has done bus tours all across Florida, he said, pushing the importance of felons voting.
I want to register to vote.
You can see Meade's excitement last year after Amendment 4 passed when he legally registered to vote. He said his organization has since paid off fines and fees for more than 40,000 returning citizens statewide so they can vote. That $27 million from celebrities and generous people who donated.
That the biggest winners is not someone with a D or an R. The biggest winners in this election are going to be the returning citizens, are going to be people who have been shut out of the democratic process for over 150 years.
That video courtesy of Click on Orlando. Guys, we are short on time, so I want to go around the horn to kind of get everyone's take. You know, I never have to worry about Russia or Iran or China, trying to undermine my rights, because the United States does a fabulous job of doing that all on their own. So, when we hear this propaganda about interference in elections, but yet we see these very coordinated, deliberate attempts to deny people who have the right to vote, to show up at the polls, with the issue in Georgia, with the voter roll purges, the long lines, reduced hours, reduced polling places, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the line is just a long, long list. Tori, let me start with you, and then we'll just go around. Why do I care what China is trying to do in interfering with the election when the state of Georgia, state of Texas, state of Florida is doing a fabulous job of suppressing the vote all by themselves?
Yeah, well, you don't have to worry about China doing it, right? It's just this is the same people that said Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. Did folks forget about this kind of stuff? Like, I don't trust anything that the FBI, the same people that ran the COINTEL program, has to say about what China, Iran, or whatever, whoever the newest enemy of U.S. imperialists and multinational corporations are. So the fact is, but when I thought about that story, I think about that's also part of Joe Biden's legacy. The fact of all those people who can't vote in Florida. Imagine how many were locked up because of the drug bills, the crime bill in '94, how he pushed Republicans hard to the right in the '80s on drugs and crime. They're the ones that caught those charges because of that. Why didn't Joe Biden figure out a way to make sure that they had their rights restored throughout his political legacy if he was so just looking back and devastated at what happened because of that? But I'm glad that it's happening. I'm glad that folks feel like they can, now have their right to vote. But it just also shows that what prisons and what this entire kind of carceral system is meant to do and who it actually serves.
Justine, you've been calling out Democrats for a long time about their hypocrisy about this exact issue. City of Baltimore closes polling stations, polling places often with frequency. And we see similar situations with people waiting long times to vote, missing work to vote, having to not vote because they've been waiting for so long and now they got to go to work.
Yeah, it's both parties. I mean, Los Angeles is Democratic-led and Democratic state, had long lines. People I know didn't vote. We are seeing, like, with everything with the Trump era, it's like what has been going on for a long time is bubbling to the surface. So there's election issues. Oh, not to mention all those frivolous lawsuits to get the Green voters off the ballot. Like, there are so many issues in every locality. And one of the things is that there's not an audit system that's external. So it's kind of like how we let police investigate themselves after they kill someone. So these county bosses, a lot of these voting bosses, these election bosses have like lifetime appointments, and they're super corrupt. They get paid. Some of them, there's so many indictments of these election bosses. So, and they audit themselves. So we are just seeing this bubbling to the surface. It's been like banana republic voting in this country for so long, and the Democratic Party has never put high up on their list election integrity because they really just, the risks of what could happen in terms of their party actually becoming populist outweigh for them what they lose in terms of actually winning presidencies.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew Corkery, you mentioned that earlier. It's a lot easier for Democrats to scream Russia, Russia, Russia than admit the fact that the reason Hillary Clinton lost in 2016 is because of lack of get out the vote efforts in some of the crucial swing states like Wisconsin and Michigan. And also the disenfranchisement of their fucking base. Their base is the one standing in line pre-2020. It's been Black folks standing in line. Like, now we're seeing white people stand in line, which is great. They get the Negro experience. You're welcome. But prior to that, it was Black and brown folks standing in line for hours on end. I can remember going back to 2000, 2004, all that. Your take, sir.
Yeah, I mean, the Democrats really need to focus on this, right? Because this is an issue that could actually drive voters and then drive support for their party if they're looking to get people more involved in the democratic process, regardless of if their policies are actually solving some of these things, right? But instead, they're just so fixated on this Russian, collusion story, the never-ending Russiagate story. And to some extent, Trump is right when he talks about that, because he's saying, like, listen, you guys invested all this money into Mueller and all these different things, and you found all sorts of corruption, but I'm still here. And you didn't find collusion, so I'm still here. So move on with it. But this story is an extension of that. And it's also a manipulation on the part of the Trump administration, this Iranian, Chinese, Russian interference story, which the DNI came out with that press conference with the FBI the other day. It's an extension of the Russiagate story, but it's also problematic because Trump and the DNI are manipulating it to say that Iran is more involved. And then the Democrats are saying, well, no, Russia is more involved. And what happens is we actually miss the damn point, which is that, we're actively suppressing domestically our own voters by all these frivolous issues with voting, curbside voting not being allowed, mail-in voting being, disparaged by Trump and everyone in the Republican Party, even though it's existed forever. And this is an issue that the Democrats could win. But instead, they want to double down on the foreign boogeyman because it alleviates them of having to address the real causes of how we got into this crisis, which is partly due to their neoliberal policies that fuel militarism, fuel destruction, and don't actually focus on what the voters want. They don't focus on, the 80-20 issues, that we've been talking about, healthcare, that's a 70-30, 80-20 issue. And they're not addressing it. The voting rights is like, that's a 70-30 issue too. It's like, own it, and you can start changing some of these polls and you can start changing some of these election results. But instead, they just want to double down on Russia. I don't understand. It's completely nonsense.
Mm-hmm. I really think it's because, not if you watch NBC and MSNBC and CNN and all the mainstream stations. I mean, the power of the two parties are dwindling. If you look at how people who are new voters are registering to vote, they are registering as independents. Fewer people are registering, claiming either party. And that's something that is such a not talked about story. And we will make it a point to talk about it on this program at a future date, perhaps even before the election, guys. But we have already gone a bit into overtime, and I don't like holding my panel hostage because they got things to do on a Friday. So I want to thank you all so much for joining us. Taure Brown, Justine Barron, Andrew Corkery, three of my faves. So happy to see y'all's faces. Thank you guys for making the time to come on the brand new show. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
No, thanks for having us, Joe. Great time.
Also want to thank Prince of Judah, 79. I see you in the comments. Thank you for finding us. And Kat Hartwell, thank you very much, dear, for your comments. Thank you, Molly Shaw, for manning the chat tonight. John Viev, Taylor, Dwayne, Adam James. Who else am I forgetting? Kelly. All right. And also, y'all, thank y'all for working on the show. Don't forget that Burn It Down with Kim Brown is also available as a podcast. You can check it out, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, wherever Dwayne sent the podcast. It should be there. So just listen to that, subscribe, click like and subscribe on his YouTube channel as well. We made it past 100 subscribers and I'm very grateful. I know that's a small number, but I'm coming up on the rough side of the mountain and I'm doing my best. So y'all have a fantastic rest of your weekend. I'm Kim Brown. We will see you on Tuesday for Burn It Down. Y'all have a good one. Where's my lighter? I lost it. Never mind. Okay. No dramatic effect to say the goodbye. Y'all just have a good one. Bye. See ya.